12,000 years ago, according to scattered records and broken stones, entire cities may have slipped beneath the surface of the earth, as if the planet itself opened its mouth and swallowed them. Why would advanced builders abandon the sky and choose the dark? Why do myths from cultures that never met describe the same descent underground after fire and flood? Why do instruments today still record pulses beneath our feet that behave less like earthquakes and more like breathing machines? Why do maps exist that show lands no one should have seen? Why does history insist nothing survived, while the ground itself refuses to stay silent? Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself, and let's dive in. Beneath the continents, far below the reach of drills, sunlight, and certainty, there exists a layer of the world that ancient people spoke of with calm familiarity, as if it were not a mystery, but a remembered fact. Long before geology assigned neat labels to strata and cores, before maps flattened the earth into borders and colors, there were descriptions of warm winds rising from stone, of halls hidden under mountains, of kingdoms that did not fall but withdrew. These were not framed as fantasies. They were told the way farmers speak of seasons, or sailors speak of tides, with the quiet assumption that the listener already knows such things are real. Modern science, however, listens differently. When early seismographs began recording rhythmic pulses beneath the crust, the data was categorized as noise, interference, background vibration. Yet these pulses did not behave like earthquakes. Earthquakes arrive violently and fade. These signals repeated, steady and patient, returning at precise intervals, as if something deep below was still running on a schedule established long before the first city rose on the surface. Instruments placed thousands of kilometers apart would sometimes register the same low-frequency hum within seconds of each other, a synchronization that should not occur in a solid, inert planet. Myths from vastly separated cultures seem to notice the same thing. In the high Andes, stories speak of ancestors emerging from caverns after a great flood, climbing upward into a ruined world. The Hopi describe sipapu, small openings in the earth, not symbolic but physical, through which people once traveled. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerians wrote of the Abzu, a subterranean realm of fresh water and wisdom ruled by Enki, a figure associated not with destruction, but with engineering, canals, and crafted order. The Abzu was described as humming, alive, sustained by unseen forces. When ancient writers described sound beneath the ground, they often compared it to wheels turning in water or breath moving through stone, metaphors that suggest motion rather than collapse. In the frozen soil of eastern Russia during the 19th century, miners digging through limestone reported something that should not have been there. Instead of fractured rock, their tools struck smooth walls. The surfaces were even, curved, lacking the marks left by chisels or erosion. Air moved through the opening, warm and dry, contradicting everything they understood about depth and climate. One miner described a chamber beyond, vast enough to swallow a church, supported by metal pillars beneath a dome of black stone. He said the place felt old in a way ruins do not, as if it had never been abandoned, only closed. When geologists arrived, the claim was dismissed. Candlelight, they said, plays tricks on the eye. Heat can rise through cracks. Limestone can fracture strangely. Yet similar reports continued to surface, separated by decades and borders. In the Pyrenees, engraved tablets appeared in caves showing cities linked by underground corridors. The symbols were unfamiliar, neither classical nor local, arranged in spirals and nested circles that suggested movement inward rather than outward. The linguist who examined them proposed that they belonged to a culture that retreated into the earth during a period of planetary chaos. His conclusion cost him credibility, but his drawings did not disappear. They re-emerged later in esoteric texts, reproduced by people who claimed no academic authority but noticed patterns scholars ignored. High in Tibet, monks preserved stories of Agarta, a vast realm beneath the mountains ruled by a lineage that had never broken. According to these accounts, the surface world cycles through ages of rise and collapse, but the inner world remains stable, lit not by the sun, but by a central radiance that never sets. This light was not described as mystical fire, but as something closer to dawn, trapped inside stone, warm, constant, sustaining life without casting shadows. The ruler of this realm, sometimes called the king of the world, was said to intervene only when surface civilizations approached self-destruction, appearing briefly before withdrawing again. In the 20th century, technology began to echo these ancient voices in unexpected ways. An American geologist working with industrial equipment reported hearing voices while welding, not hallucinations in the usual sense, but structured messages that spoke of machines deep within the earth, still operating after tens of thousands of years. His claims were published as fiction, a safer category, yet letters flooded in from readers who described similar dreams of silent railways beneath obsidian tunnels, of air that shimmered like heat without any visible source. When imagination aligns across strangers who share no contact, psychologists call it coincidence. Engineers call it signal bleed. Polar exploration added further fragments. During a massive military-backed expedition to Antarctica, a seasoned explorer recorded seeing green land beyond the ice and craft capable of vertical ascent, unlike any known aircraft of the time. The official report omitted these details. His private notes vanished into archives, yet copies circulated quietly, passed hand to hand among those already inclined to believe that the poles were not merely ends of the earth, but entrances. The idea was not new. For centuries, maps had hinted at openings where the world curved inward, where winds behaved strangely and compasses lost discipline. By the mid-20th century, these scattered threads began to braid together. Soviet geophysicists detected magnetic pulses beneath Central Asia that behaved like heartbeats rather than random fields. Sound waves sent into the Himalayas reflected as if bouncing off hollow chambers instead of solid rock. When a researcher presented this data publicly, the paper was removed from conference records. He later remarked that the fear was not of being wrong, but of who might be listening from below. Even deep drilling projects contributed uneasy data. As boreholes descended kilometers into the crust, temperatures rose beyond prediction, then unexpectedly dropped. Metallic sounds echoed up shafts where no machinery was operating. Engineers described the vibrations as mechanical, rhythmic, indifferent to human presence. Official explanations invoked rock stress and feedback loops, yet private memos compared the sounds to engines idling in sealed rooms. What emerges from these accounts is not a single claim, but a consistent shape. A world beneath the world, described by myth as refuge, by explorers as anomaly, by instruments as rhythm. A civilization that did not vanish in fire or flood, but stepped sideways into the earth itself, sealing its doors behind it. Whether these descriptions point to literal cities, advanced geological engineering, or something stranger still, they challenge the assumption that history moves only across the surface. The ground beneath us may not be a grave, but a roof, sheltering something older than memory, still warm, still humming, still waiting. Across the surface of the earth, there exist maps that should not exist, documents that quietly contradict the timeline taught in classrooms. They are not crude sketches or imaginative fantasies, but precise renderings of coastlines, mountains, and waterways drawn with confidence, as if copied rather than invented. One such map, created in the early 16th century on gazelle skin, shows lands that official history insists were unknown at the time. At its southern edge appears a continent shaped like Antarctica, not buried under ice, but traced with rivers and bays as though it had been observed during a warmer age. The unsettling detail is not that the land is there, but that it is accurate. The admiral who signed the map claimed he compiled it from much older sources, charts inherited from sailors and libraries that no longer existed. He wrote that these originals dated back to the time of Alexander the Great, copied and recopied through generations. This statement is often dismissed as exaggeration, yet when modern cartographers overlaid the ancient coastlines onto seismic maps beneath Antarctica's ice, features aligned with valleys and rifts now buried kilometers below frozen layers. To explain this away as coincidence requires more imagination than accepting that someone, at some distant time, possessed knowledge of the Earth that has since been lost. This map is not alone. In the 18th century, a French geographer presented another depiction of the southern continent, dividing it into two landmasses separated by a channel. Centuries later, seismic surveys confirmed that Antarctica does indeed consist of two primary masses divided by subglacial mountains. The accuracy of this division, achieved without aircraft, satellites, or ice-penetrating radar, remains unexplained. Earlier still, a 16th-century chart depicts rivers flowing across Antarctica in proportions that match modern measurements within a few degrees of latitude. Historians often attribute such precision to luck or artistic license, yet repeated accuracy across time and geography erodes that defense. Maps from Asia and the Middle East add further strangeness. Chinese imperial charts describe inner lands marked not at the edge of the world, but beneath it, bordered by circular notations indicating enclosed realms where stars are absent and warm winds rise. A Persian map from the 14th century labels a subterranean sea, its edges drawn like coastlines rather than abstract decoration. These are not navigational tools for sailors, but records of something inward-facing, as though the mapmakers were charting a geography beneath the crust rather than upon it. When modern technology examines the Earth from above, it finds echoes of these old drawings. Satellite magnetometry reveals grid-like disturbances beneath Antarctica, symmetrical and geometric, patterns that nature rarely produces without chaos. Radar surveys detect voids beneath ice and stone that reflect signals at right angles, forming shapes more consistent with corridors than caverns. These voids are often small when measured individually, but their repetition across vast distances hints at intentional design rather than random fracture. Military and scientific programs have repeatedly encountered these anomalies and then fallen silent. During mid-20th century radar sweeps of Antarctica, technicians noted symmetrical reflections beneath the ice. The data was labeled inconclusive and archived. Later, independent analysts who gained access to fragments described the patterns as foundations, outlines too regular to be explained by geology alone. Similar shapes were detected beneath the Amazon basin and the Tibetan plateau, each dismissed under different terminology, each quietly filed away. The reluctance to pursue these findings publicly contrasts sharply with the curiosity of ancient cultures. For them, the Earth was layered, not solid, a place of stacked worlds rather than a single surface. In Hindu cosmology, Nagaloka is described as a realm beneath rivers and mountains, home to serpent beings who guard jeweled cities. These serpents were not animals, but metaphors for wisdom that moves through hidden channels, much like water or electricity. In Norse tradition, Svartalfheim lies beneath the roots of the world tree, inhabited by master smiths who forge impossible objects in darkness lit only by their own craft. Even in the Americas, far from Eurasian mythologies, similar ideas appear. The Hopi describe previous worlds destroyed by imbalance, with survivors descending into the earth before emerging again. These stories are not framed as punishment, but as preservation, the earth acting as a womb rather than a tomb. When survivors return to the surface, they bring knowledge with them, restarting civilization rather than inventing it anew. Modern drilling projects have occasionally brushed against this hidden architecture. The deepest boreholes ever drilled recorded temperatures and pressures that behaved unpredictably, sometimes cooler than expected, sometimes accompanied by sounds that engineers struggled to classify. These sounds were not the chaotic grinding of rock, but steady tones, low and resonant, repeating with a regularity that suggested machinery rather than fracture. One technician described it as standing near a massive engine heard through walls too thick to penetrate. Under Antarctica, the mysteries deepen. Subglacial lakes sealed for millions of years show radar signatures that resemble corridors and arches beneath their beds. When one such lake was finally drilled into, the operation halted abruptly. Samples were classified, the site restricted, and public explanations cited contamination concerns. Yet internal communications hinted at unexpected pressure changes and organic readings that did not fit existing models of isolated ecosystems. Heat anomalies beneath ice shelves add another layer of contradiction. In places where temperatures should be uniformly lethal, instruments detect localized warmth, enough to sustain liquid water without volcanic activity. These warm zones appear and disappear, sometimes aligned with magnetic disturbances, sometimes synchronized across distances too great for coincidence. Some researchers propose geothermal explanations, but the absence of volcanic signatures leaves gaps in that narrative. What ties these observations together is not proof, but consistency. Maps that should not be accurate are accurate. Myths that should contradict each other instead align. Instruments designed to study stone record rhythms more like breath. Each piece alone can be dismissed. Together, they suggest that the Earth's interior has been shaped, observed, and perhaps inhabited in ways that challenge modern assumptions. If a civilization did retreat beneath the surface after a cataclysm, as so many traditions claim, it would explain both the sudden loss of advanced knowledge and its later reappearance. It would explain why ancient monuments appear fully formed, why engineering leaps occur without visible development. Knowledge preserved below would not need to evolve, it would only need to resurface. The maps may be fragments of that preservation, copied imperfectly over centuries by people who no longer understood their origins. The anomalies beneath ice and stone may be the physical remains of systems still in place, dormant or active, indifferent to the civilizations rising and falling above them. In this view, the Earth is not merely a planet with a hidden core, but an archive, layered with memory, its deepest pages sealed not by ignorance, but by deliberate withdrawal. Long before satellites traced magnetic lines and deep drilling pierced the crust, thinkers tried to understand the Earth by listening to what it did, rather than what it revealed. In the late 17th century, an astronomer proposed that the planet might not be a solid mass at all, but a series of nested shells, each rotating within the other. His idea was not born of mysticism, but of observation. Compasses drifted, magnetic poles wandered. The Earth behaved less like a single object and more like a system with moving parts. To explain this, he imagined vast hollow spaces inside the planet, regions that could carry their own magnetism and perhaps sustain life. At the time, such a proposal was not immediately ridiculed. Science was still flexible, willing to test the boundaries between speculation and measurement. Gravity itself was poorly understood, and the idea that the Earth's density might vary dramatically was not unreasonable. Later measurements in the Andes revealed that mountains exerted less gravitational pull than expected, implying lower density beneath. While modern geology attributes this to crustal composition, the data once fueled serious discussion about internal voids. In the early 19th century, the theory escaped academic circles and entered public imagination through an American Army officer who declared that the Earth was hollow and open at the poles. He distributed pamphlets, held lectures, and petitioned governments to fund expeditions. Newspapers mocked him, yet his persistence forced the idea into national conversation. His followers believed that warm, habitable lands lay beyond the polar ice, lit by an internal sun and protected from the extremes of the surface world. Though his proposed expeditions were denied, his influence endured. A younger advocate persuaded political leaders to authorize a major naval voyage towards the southern polar regions. Officially, the mission sought to chart coastlines and gather scientific data. Privately, journals from the expedition mentioned strange stillness in compass readings and a diffuse glow on the horizon, where no sun should have been visible. These notes were never included in final reports, yet they survived in personal papers, hinting that the explorers encountered something they could not explain within accepted frameworks. As the 19th century progressed, instrumentation improved, and the Earth began to reveal internal contradictions. Seismic waves traveled through the planet at speeds that sometimes slowed or bent unexpectedly, suggesting regions of different density or composition. One German scientist argued that these irregularities indicated large internal cavities, or oceans. His diagrams, showing a luminous inner sea and suspended central light, circulated widely in occult publications, blurring the line between science and symbolism. Literature absorbed these ideas and reflected them back with unsettling realism. A self-published novel described a descent through extensive cave systems into a glowing subterranean world. Although framed as fiction, its geological descriptions matched real cave formations, including smooth, tool-like surfaces and air currents that behaved as if guided. Readers noted that the book read less like fantasy and more like a travelogue disguised as allegory. By the early 20th century, explorers claimed to have reached inner regions through polar routes. One Norwegian sailor wrote of passing through an opening in the Arctic into a warm land bathed in soft light. He described towering inhabitants, advanced structures, and a sky illuminated by a dim internal sun. His account was dismissed, yet his navigational details, wind directions, and star positions corresponded accurately with Arctic conditions. The precision undermined the claim that the story was pure invention. Military institutions quietly took notice. During the interwar period, expeditions to remote polar regions increased, often under scientific pretexts. One European mission mapped vast areas of Antarctica and marked territories with metallic insignia. Decades later, rumors linked these missions to attempts at locating subterranean access points, though no conclusive evidence surfaced. What remained undeniable was the strategic interest in regions where magnetic behavior deviated from norms. In the mid-20th century, technology brought the hollow Earth idea into contact with hard data. Deep boreholes drilled into continental crust revealed that the Earth was thinner and more complex than models predicted. Temperatures rose, then fell unexpectedly. Sonic reverberations echoed up the shafts, deep and resonant, unsettling enough that technicians compared them to voices or machinery. Official explanations cited rock stress and fracturing, yet recordings captured rhythms too regular to be dismissed entirely. Seismology eventually established that the Earth contains a molten core rather than a vast, empty interior. Yet even within this framework, anomalies persisted. Large regions beneath Africa and the Pacific exhibited unusually low seismic velocity, meaning waves slowed dramatically as they passed through. These zones were immense, large enough to contain continents. Scientists labeled them with technical terms and moved on, acknowledging that their true nature remained poorly understood. Outside academic circles, these anomalies were interpreted differently. Some suggested they were remnants of collapsed hollow regions, ancient shells that had partially filled over time. Others proposed they were engineered spaces, vast enough to host systems that could regulate planetary processes. These ideas remained speculative, yet they drew strength from the consistency of myth, map, and measurement. The hollow Earth theory never fully disappeared. It evolved. No longer imagined as a single empty sphere, it became a vision of layered complexity, a planet honeycombed with chambers, conduits, and zones of altered physics. Engineers studying resonance began to notice that certain frequencies behaved unusually within mountains and deep caves, amplifying and sustaining themselves as if the stone were tuned to respond. Ancient builders seemed to know this. Temples carved from solid rock align with resonant frequencies that cause sound to linger and shimmer. Cold War research briefly brushed against these ideas. Declassified fragments from joint projects mention resonance sensors placed along major fault lines, forming a global lattice. Officially, the goal was earthquake monitoring. Unofficially, Notes suggest an interest in whether the Earth transmitted controlled frequencies through its crust. The project ended abruptly, its data sealed, leaving only hints of what was observed. Despite advancements in planetary science, a question remains unresolved. Why does the Earth sometimes behave less like a passive object and more like a system in motion? Magnetic reversals, rhythmic hums, synchronized micro-tremors, and persistent anomalies suggest processes that are organized rather than chaotic. Whether these processes are purely natural or shaped by ancient intervention is unknown. What is clear is that the hollow Earth was never merely a fantasy. It was a serious attempt to explain inconsistencies, born from observation and sustained by unanswered questions. Even as modern models replace older ones, the anomalies remain, quiet reminders that the planet beneath our feet is not fully understood. The idea that something once withdrew inward, shaping the Earth from within, continues to linger not because it is proven, but because it refuses to be disproven. In the middle of the 20th century, as humanity learned to listen more carefully to the planet, the Earth began to answer in ways that unsettled those trained to expect randomness. Miners in remote regions of Siberia reported a persistent hum rising through frozen ground, a sound too steady to be wind and too deep to be machinery from the surface. When drills were shut down, the noise continued, unchanged, indifferent to human activity. Seismographs nearby traced the vibration as a repeating pattern, cycling every few seconds with a consistency that suggested regulation rather than collapse. The report appeared briefly in a local paper and then disappeared, as if swallowed by the same silence that surrounded the sound itself. Similar tones were later recorded at one of the deepest drilling projects ever attempted. As sensors descended beyond 12 kilometers, the rock began to behave strangely. Temperatures rose far beyond prediction, then abruptly stabilized. Sonic instruments detected low-frequency vibrations that did not align with known geological processes. Engineers described the sound as metallic, rhythmic, almost patient. When analyzed later, the recordings revealed subtle modulation, a rise and fall that resembled an engine idling rather than stone fracturing under pressure. Official explanations framed the phenomenon as natural resonance, but internal notes referred to it simply as machine-like. Across the globe, these patterns repeated. During oil exploration in Alaska, geophones captured vibrations long after drilling equipment had been powered down. The sound moved laterally through rock instead of vertically, traveling as if guided along corridors rather than radiating outward. One engineer wrote privately that it felt like standing above a massive mechanism sealed deep below, its presence detectable but unreachable. His report was filed and forgotten. In the late 1990s, oceanic sensors recorded one of the most powerful underwater sounds ever detected. Nicknamed the bloop, the signal originated from the southern Pacific near the Antarctic peninsula. It was loud enough to be heard across thousands of kilometers, yet it repeated with uncanny regularity. Authorities attributed it to ice movement, but the frequency did not match known glacial events. The waveform showed structure, rising and falling in a pattern that suggested rotation or cyclical operation. The location coincided with regions already known for magnetic anomalies and blurred satellite imagery. As satellite technology improved, magnetometers began detecting faint alternating fields beneath Antarctica and other remote regions. These fields pulsed at precise intervals, often every 12 hours, a timing that mirrored earlier seismic data from entirely different continents. The pulses appeared, vanished, then returned, as if governed by a schedule independent of surface conditions. Scientists labeled them fluctuations, yet the precision of their timing challenged that label. Ancient texts seem to describe the same phenomenon using different language. Sumerian tablets speak of the breath of Enki rising from the ground, a sound likened to copper wheels turning beneath water. The Rig Veda refers to a hidden engine of the world, a divine mechanism that spins beneath the Earth's skin and sustains cosmic order. Tibetan chronicles describe a buried system beneath sacred mountains that sings when balance is threatened. In each case, the imagery points to motion, sound, and continuity rather than chaos. Modern instruments add uncomfortable clarity. During drilling beneath Antarctic ice shelves, electromagnetic pulses were recorded at frequencies close to the Earth's natural resonance, the background hum generated by lightning and atmospheric interaction. Unlike the natural signal, these pulses carried complex modulation, subtle variations layered onto the frequency as if encoding information. The data was analyzed briefly, then withdrawn. A single internal message leaked later contained a short sentence. The system is still active. Cold War archives hint that governments noticed these patterns earlier than publicly acknowledged. Joint research initiatives placed resonance sensors along major fault lines, forming a global network aligned with tectonic boundaries. Officially, the objective was earthquake monitoring. Unofficial diagrams show transmission points arranged with mathematical symmetry, connected by lines that mirrored ancient ley line maps once dismissed as folklore. The project ended abruptly, its results classified, its purpose left unexplained. Independent researchers analyzing public seismic databases noticed something else. Tiny vibrations, too small to be felt, sometimes occurred simultaneously across continents. The delay between detections suggested a signal moving through the planet faster than seismic waves, but slower than electromagnetic transmission, as if traveling along an internal medium unknown to current models. When plotted over time, these events formed a recurring rhythm, steady and ancient, repeating without regard for surface activity. Attempts to listen more directly have produced unsettling recordings. Acoustic arrays lowered into deep volcanic shafts captured oscillations that repeated with clock-like precision. When shifted into audible range, the sound resembled distant turbines turning in darkness, each cycle beginning smoothly and fading without abrupt stop. Official explanations described microseismic coupling, yet the uniformity of the pattern resisted easy dismissal. Geophysicists studying Earth's magnetic field acknowledge that it reverses polarity over long timescales. During periods leading up to such reversals, subterranean hums tend to intensify. Ancient myths describe these epochs as ages of upheaval, moments when the world's heart beats faster. If something beneath the crust interacts with the magnetic field, it may respond to these changes, adjusting, compensating, maintaining balance in ways not yet understood. Some theorists propose that these signals are purely natural, the product of deep geological resonance amplified by the planet's structure. Others suggest they are remnants of an ancient energy network, constructed long before recorded history, designed to draw power from geothermal gradients and magnetic flux. In this view, the systems were built to endure, operating autonomously long after their creators retreated or vanished. Declassified documents from the 1960s reference a project focused on non-natural resonance phenomena beneath Central Asia. The conclusion, never published, stated that mechanisms within the crust appeared regulated rather than random. No further investigation followed. Similar projects elsewhere were halted under vague justifications, often citing cost or technical difficulty. What remains is a planet that refuses to stay quiet. From polar ice to desert rock, from ocean floors to mountain cores, the same low pulse persists. It does not announce itself. It does not escalate. It simply continues, steady and indifferent, as if following instructions written into the earth itself. Whether these vibrations originate from geological processes not yet understood, or from systems deliberately embedded in the planet's depths, their persistence challenges the idea of a fully inert Earth. Something below continues to move, to resonate, to turn. It does so without regard for the civilizations above, humming through ages of myth, empire, and extinction. A reminder that the ground beneath human history may be far more active and far older than the stories written upon its surface. Across civilizations separated by oceans and millennia, there persists a strangely consistent image of a world beneath the world that is not dark, but luminous. This light is never described as fire. It casts no smoke, produces no heat haze, and requires no fuel. It simply exists, steady and diffuse, illuminating stone corridors and vast chambers as naturally as daylight fills the open sky. Ancient writers struggled to describe it, often comparing it to dawn trapped inside rock or to gold dust suspended in air. What they were trying to convey was not brightness, but permanence. In Sanskrit epics, Nagaloka is portrayed as a subterranean realm where cities glow with the radiance of jewels embedded in their walls. These jewels are not ornaments, but functional sources of illumination, described as stones that breathe fire without flame. The Nagas themselves are not literal serpents, but symbolic guardians of knowledge, their winding forms echoing the flow of energy through hidden channels beneath the earth. This interpretation becomes clearer when the texts describe these beings as masters of metallurgy and geometry, rather than creatures of myth. Tibetan traditions speak of Shambhala as a physical place hidden beneath layers of mountains. Its capital, Kalapa, is said to be illuminated by a central radiance that never dims. The Kalachakra teachings insist this is not metaphor. They describe architecture, gates, routes, and even distances, grounding the legend in geography rather than allegory. The light of Shambhala is described as shadowless, suggesting a diffuse source that fills space evenly, much like modern artificial lighting rather than sunlight. Similar descriptions appear in early Christian mysticism. A 4th-century monk wrote of a paradise beneath the roots of the mountains, where lamps never burn out and rivers shine as though reflecting an unseen sky. His account does not frame this place as heaven, but as a hidden sanctuary preserved on earth. The language implies infrastructure rather than miracle, systems designed to endure rather than divine intervention. Reports of such light did not vanish with antiquity. In the early 20th century, explorers in Central Asia recorded stories told by monks and herders of an underground kingdom called Agarti, or Arta. The ruler of this realm was said to observe the surface world through devices that mirror events above, allowing the inner world to remain informed without revealing itself. These devices were described as glowing spheres suspended in air, transmitting knowledge silently. Though dismissed as superstition, the descriptions resemble modern concepts of remote sensing more than folklore. Mining records add an unexpected layer of corroboration. In the 1930s, a team drilling for diamonds in southern Africa reportedly broke into a cavern lined with crystalline formations that emitted a faint glow after lamps were extinguished. Chemists later labeled the effect triboluminescence, a phenomenon where certain crystals emit light when stressed. Yet the miners insisted the glow had pulsed rhythmically before any disturbance, brightening and dimming as if responding to presence. Polar exploration revived these accounts. During a mid-century flight over Antarctica, an experienced explorer allegedly noted a horizon lit from below, a soft inner glow illuminating terrain beneath the ice. His official report omitted the observation, but copies of his private notes circulated decades later. The language used mirrors older descriptions from Tibetan texts almost precisely, referencing light without source and land warmed from beneath. Historical records from Europe echo the same theme. In the 16th century, a German chronicler wrote of an abandoned salt mine where carvings of suns and concentric circles adorned the walls. Workers reported that the chambers were faintly illuminated even before torches were lit. When air currents shifted, the glow faded, as if the walls themselves breathed. Similar accounts appear in 19th-century travel journals describing caves in South America, where stones glowed only in silence, their light extinguished by noise or motion. Modern science occasionally stumbles upon phenomena that feel uncomfortably similar. Deep cave systems isolated for millions of years have been found to host ecosystems sustained without sunlight. In one such cave, sealed from the surface, walls emitted a faint green glow produced by chemical reactions involving bacteria and minerals. Biologists classify this as chemosynthesis, yet some researchers noted rhythmic flickering that seemed disproportionate to purely chemical processes. During deep drilling operations in Siberia, geologists recorded light appearing within crystalline layers of rock after mechanical pressure was applied. The glow persisted even as temperatures fell, fading slowly rather than extinguishing abruptly. Official reports described ionized air under stress. Privately, one senior geophysicist wrote that the phenomenon felt responsive, as though the rock itself were reacting rather than merely emitting. Across indigenous traditions, light beneath the earth is consistently associated with knowledge and preservation. The Hopi describe their underworld not as a place of darkness, but of safety and illumination. They say their ancestors lived there during times of surface destruction, guided by inner light until it was safe to return. Norse texts speak of Gimle, a radiant refuge beneath the roots of the world tree, untouched by fire or flood. The persistence of this imagery suggests more than metaphor. Light without flame implies energy sources, unlike those used on the surface. Modern physics offers possibilities. Certain crystals can emit light under electrical stress. Geothermal gradients can generate electricity through thermoelectric effects. Magnetic fields interacting with conductive materials can produce sustained luminescence. If an ancient civilization understood these principles, even in rudimentary form, it could have engineered illumination that required no combustion and produced no smoke. This would explain why so many accounts emphasize clean air, absence of soot, and perpetual glow. It would also explain why such light is rarely observed today. If access points were sealed, if systems were buried deeper over time by shifting geology and ice, their glow would remain hidden, visible only in rare breaches or anomalies. What remains striking is the consistency. From Sanskrit verses to Tibetan chronicles, from mining logs to polar diaries, the same description repeats. A world beneath the earth, lit without fire, sustained without sun, preserved through ages of catastrophe. Whether this light is the byproduct of natural processes or the remnant of deliberate engineering, its presence in human memory is too uniform to ignore. If a civilization did retreat underground to survive a planetary disaster, light would have been essential. Not symbolic light, but practical illumination, reliable and enduring. The legends may not be celebrating miracle, but remembering infrastructure. In that remembrance, the glow beneath the earth becomes not a fantasy, but a clue, one that suggests the darkness below may never have been truly dark at all. Beneath the stories of light and hidden cities lies another recurring motif that appears with unsettling regularity across continents. The idea of knowledge not written on paper, but embedded into the earth itself. Ancient cultures often described libraries that were not shelves of books, but chambers carved into stone, places where memory was preserved in materials that fire, flood, and time could not easily destroy. These accounts do not frame preservation as secrecy alone, but as transformation, turning information into structure, vibration, and substance. In the late 19th century, a Tibetan monk recorded a descent beneath a major monastery into corridors cut directly into bedrock. He described vaults filled with black stone tablets covered in faintly glowing inscriptions. The symbols were not readable in any known language, yet the monks insisted they were not meant to be read visually. They claimed the tablets were records of previous ages, designed to be understood through resonance rather than sight. The chamber was called the Inner Library, a place where history was stored in the earth itself. Similar traditions exist far from the Himalayas. In the Andes, local guides spoke to early archaeologists of a hidden city beneath the mountains, where metallic tablets recorded the knowledge of the First World. One researcher reported walls covered in geometric patterns and plates of unknown metal engraved with star charts that did not match the modern sky. The artifacts were allegedly removed for study and then vanished during political unrest. What remains are journal entries describing a space that felt more like an archive than a sanctuary. In the mid-20th century, a priest in South America displayed thin metal sheets engraved with unfamiliar symbols. He claimed they were gifts from indigenous groups who said the plates came from tunnels beneath the jungle. Photographs show imagery resembling both ancient Near Eastern writing and early Indic forms, blended into something distinct. When the church housing the collection burned, most of the artifacts were lost. The surviving pieces were sealed away by authorities, deemed culturally sensitive and inaccessible. Exploration of vast cave systems added further intrigue. In one of the largest cave networks on Earth, explorers reported long passages with unnaturally smooth walls and sharp angles inconsistent with erosion. One researcher claimed to have found metallic books arranged on stone pedestals, each etched with raised lines forming intricate patterns. He refused to disclose their location, stating that the chambers were not meant to be opened by the surface world. Subsequent expeditions found only natural caves, yet magnetic irregularities persisted in the area, suggesting something unusual remained hidden. Legends of subterranean archives appear in ancient Egypt as well. Beneath the great monuments of the plateau, texts speak of a hall of records containing the knowledge of a civilization that existed before dynastic times. In the late 20th century, seismic surveys beneath the area revealed rectangular voids arranged symmetrically. Authorities acknowledged their existence but halted further exploration, declaring them of no archaeological interest. The contradiction between acknowledgement and dismissal only deepened speculation. Mesopotamian inscriptions reference a house of deep knowledge sealed during a reign that predates conventional chronology by tens of thousands of years. The tablets describe a chamber of light without flame where the records of humanity's cycles were stored. No physical evidence has been recovered, yet the description aligns with accounts from Tibet and South America, suggesting a shared concept rather than isolated myth. Modern discoveries occasionally brush against these ancient ideas. Radar surveys beneath desert regions in Asia have detected rectilinear structures aligned with magnetic north, buried beneath layers of compacted sand. Local legends describe cities swallowed by dunes after lights beneath the ground burned without flame. Excavations have never been authorized, and the regions remain restricted, preserving the mystery through silence rather than denial. Scientists studying deep caves have observed unusual acoustic behavior. At certain frequencies, sound does not dissipate, but lingers, echoing indefinitely as if trapped within the stone. Physicists describe this as phonon trapping, a condition where vibrations persist due to the structure of the material. Ancient mystics described a similar concept, believing that spoken words could be preserved in stone, waiting to be awakened. In this view, knowledge was not written, but sung into the earth. This idea gains weight when considering the properties of certain minerals. Quartz and granite, abundant in ancient structures, are piezoelectric, meaning they generate electrical charge when mechanically stressed. Under immense pressure deep within the crust, such materials could store vibrational patterns for extraordinarily long periods. If an ancient civilization understood this, even intuitively, it could have encoded information directly into rock, creating a library immune to decay. Modern instruments may be detecting fragments of this system. Acoustic sensors placed deep within volcanic shafts have recorded rhythmic bursts that resemble structured patterns rather than random noise. When converted into audible frequencies, some recordings sound almost syllabic, with repeating intervals and pauses. Official explanations cite atmospheric interference, yet the consistency across different locations challenges that conclusion. Similar tones have been recorded beneath mountain ranges and ocean floors. When cross-referenced, these frequencies align across continents, suggesting a global system rather than isolated phenomena. Some researchers propose mineral resonance triggered by magnetic flux. Others speculate that these are remnants of an intentional network designed to preserve and transmit information. Ancient texts describe such systems obliquely. Sumerian myths speak of stones that sing of memory. Egyptian priests wrote of a sacred force that allowed stone to speak when properly awakened. Tibetan chronicles mention whispering vaults where the voices of the past could be heard when the air was still. These descriptions may have been attempts to explain a technology that functioned beyond the language of the time. If knowledge was preserved beneath the earth, it would explain why certain civilizations appear suddenly with advanced understanding of astronomy, engineering, and mathematics. Rather than inventing these systems from nothing, they may have inherited fragments of a much older archive, accessed briefly before being lost again. The Earth itself would serve as the medium, its stone and vibration carrying memory across ages. What emerges from these accounts is not proof of a hidden library, but a persistent pattern. Humanity has long imagined knowledge as something fragile, easily lost. Yet these traditions suggest an alternative vision, one in which memory is embedded into the planet, preserved by pressure, silence, and time. If such archives exist, they may not reveal themselves through excavation, but through resonance, speaking softly through stone, waiting for listeners who know how to hear. Scattered through excavation reports, mining logs, and half-forgotten newspapers are accounts of builders who do not belong to the civilizations credited with the structures found above them. These builders are rarely described directly. Instead, they appear through absence, through precision that feels out of place, through stone that behaves as if shaped by rules no longer understood. Their work is often buried deep, sealed under layers of time that should have erased all trace of intention. Yet the intention remains unmistakable. In the late 19th century, miners cutting into a coal seam in the American Midwest encountered something no geological model could explain. Beneath 30 meters of solid earth lay a paved stone floor, level and fitted with care. Below it were walls made of smooth blocks locked together without mortar, their surfaces unmarred by erosion. The mine was flooded soon after, and the site sealed. No samples were preserved. What remains is the testimony of workers who insisted the structure felt engineered rather than accidental, as if they had broken into a room rather than a layer of rock. Similar discoveries appear in different eras and locations. In the early 20th century, miners in Oklahoma reportedly extracted a metallic cup embedded in coal dated to hundreds of millions of years old. In Massachusetts, blasting revealed a vessel composed of silver and zinc, fused in a manner inconsistent with known metallurgy of the time. These objects were briefly examined, catalogued as anomalies, and then removed from public view. Official explanations labeled them curiosities, but their geological context was never convincingly addressed. Ancient traditions assign names to these builders. In South Asia, they are remembered as Nagas, beings associated with serpentine imagery that symbolizes flow, cycles, and hidden pathways rather than literal form. They are credited with mastery of metallurgy, architecture, and sacred geometry, and are said to dwell beneath rivers and mountains. In Celtic lore, the Tuatha De Danann are described as a radiant race who retreated into hollow hills after losing dominion over the surface. Their departure is framed not as defeat, but as withdrawal, taking their knowledge with them. Greek myths speak of master forgers who crafted tools for gods, objects that controlled sea, time, and harvest. After their work was done, they were banished beneath the earth or sea, condemned to labor unseen. These stories are often dismissed as allegory, yet they preserve a consistent image of skilled engineers removed from the surface world, their workshops hidden below. In Tibet, legends of Agarta describe an inner lineage of engineers who built with sound rather than force. Stone, according to these accounts, was shaped through vibration, guided into form by resonance. While this sounds mystical, Modern physics recognizes that sound can influence matter at small scales, organizing particles into complex patterns. Ancient builders may not have expressed this knowledge mathematically, but they may have understood its effects through observation and ritualized practice. Archaeological sites above ground carry quiet echoes of this lost expertise. Massive stone blocks fitted with tolerances tighter than modern construction techniques appear across continents. In Egypt, granite blocks weighing tens of tons are cut and placed with precision measurable to fractions of a millimeter. In Peru, polygonal stones interlock so seamlessly that even a blade cannot pass between them. In India, entire temples were carved downward from solid rock, following symmetrical plans that required long-term vision and control. The cultures credited with these works left no detailed records of how they were achieved. Tools capable of such precision have not been recovered. Some researchers propose that these monuments were built atop far older foundations, the visible remnants of a much earlier technological tradition. Over time, later civilizations may have imitated the forms without understanding the methods, producing impressive but incomplete echoes of the original craft. Evidence of unusual engineering appears even deeper. In the mid-20th century, scientists studying magnetic resonance beneath a mountain range discovered traces of metallic alloys arranged in geometric patterns within the bedrock. The distribution suggested a grid, thin veins of metal extending across vast distances in hexagonal symmetry. Samples revealed rare isotopes fused in ways that challenged contemporary metallurgy. The finding was classified, its origin left unexplained. Ancient texts offer clues to the purpose of such systems. Sumerian myths describe devices called me, objects of order that governed law, craft, and civilization itself. These were not symbolic laws but functional instruments, mechanisms that maintained balance. Indian texts describing vimanas speak of engines powered by mercury and vibration, language that reads less like poetry and more like fragmented engineering notes filtered through myth. Resonance appears again and again as a unifying principle. Modern acoustic studies of ancient temples reveal that sound behaves unusually within them, amplifying and sustaining frequencies that cause air to shimmer. The same frequencies are detected in subterranean anomalies beneath mountain ranges. This suggests that ancient builders may have understood resonance as both a construction tool and an energy source, capable of shaping stone and transmitting power without combustion. Cold War research briefly touched on this possibility. Declassified fragments mention projects investigating controlled resonance beneath Central Asia, focusing on regions where compasses failed and radio signals distorted. The conclusion, never formally published, stated that mechanisms within the crust appeared regulated. The research ended without explanation, leaving only scattered references to systems that behaved as though designed. The consistent theme across these accounts is retreat. The builders are never described as destroyed. They withdraw when the surface becomes unstable, when floods rise, skies burn, or civilizations collapse. Their descent is purposeful, not panicked. They take their machines, their archives, and their knowledge with them, sealing entrances behind layers of stone and time. If such engineers existed, their legacy would not be fragile ruins, but enduring systems embedded into the planet itself. Their constructions would be silent, stable, and resistant to erosion. They would not announce themselves, but continue functioning. humming faintly beneath human history. The strange precision found deep underground, the metallic grids, the resonant chambers, may be fragments of that legacy. Across continents and cultures, the same fingerprints appear. Precision without explanation, stone shaped beyond necessity, machines implied but never seen. The builders vanish, but their work remains, folded into the bones of the earth. Whether they were a forgotten branch of humanity or something stranger, their presence lingers not in stories alone, but in measurements, anomalies, and structures that refuse to fit comfortably into the narrative of gradual progress. The Earth itself may be the last monument they left behind. Around 12,000 years ago, the surface of the Earth entered a moment of rupture so abrupt that it still appears as a scar in ice cores, sediments, and memory. Glaciers that had been retreating suddenly surged back. Temperatures in the northern hemisphere dropped within decades, not centuries. Forests burned, oceans rose, and entire ecosystems collapsed. Geologists call this interval the Younger Dryas, a return to near Ice Age conditions that arrived without warning and ended just as suddenly. In the soil from North America to Greenland, from Europe to Western Asia, researchers have found a thin black layer rich in soot, carbon, and microscopic diamonds formed only under extreme heat and pressure. These nanodiamonds are not the slow products of tectonics. They form in moments of violence, under conditions created by cosmic impacts or intense atmospheric explosions. One leading hypothesis proposes that fragments of a disintegrating comet struck or airburst over the northern ice sheets, unleashing firestorms and shockwaves across continents. Mammoths, mastodons, and other megafauna vanished. Human settlements that had persisted for thousands of years were erased almost overnight. What survived did not do so evenly. Some regions show continuity, others fall silent. Ancient stories describe this moment with remarkable consistency. In Mesopotamia, the deluge arrives not as rain alone, but as destruction from the sky, followed by rising waters. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the gods warn a chosen few to preserve life and knowledge. In Greek tradition, the flood of Deucalion ends an age of humanity. In India, the Matsya Purana describes a time when the sun itself turns hostile, scorching the land before the waters rise. Across these accounts, the response is not flight into the heavens, but descent into refuge. In the Andes, oral histories speak of ancestors retreating into the womb of the earth when the world above burned. Among the Hopi, the people are guided underground through openings in the land as the surface becomes uninhabitable. They remain below until balance returns. These are not tales of burial. They are stories of survival, of preservation during an interval when the open world could not sustain life. Archaeology offers subtle confirmation. At sites like Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey, massive stone circles were erected with advanced planning and symbolic complexity, then deliberately buried around the same time the Younger Dryas ended. The burial was careful, intentional, as though the builders sought to protect something rather than abandon it. The carvings on the stones depict animals, celestial symbols, and shapes some astronomers interpret as references to cometary impacts visible in the sky at the time. In Paleolithic caves across Europe, animal figures from this period are often shown facing downward or entering openings. Early researchers thought this symbolic. Later analysis noted that the timing aligns with climatic collapse. The images may represent memory rather than myth, a visual record of descent, of movement away from a hostile surface into the safety of stone. Geochemical evidence reinforces the picture. Ice cores from Greenland show spikes in beryllium-10, an isotope associated with increased cosmic radiation. These spikes coincide with the onset of the younger Dryas, suggesting a disturbance in Earth's shielding, possibly from solar outbursts or extraterrestrial debris. Such radiation would have damaged surface ecosystems, weakened the atmosphere, and made prolonged exposure dangerous. Underground environments would have offered natural protection. If a technologically advanced culture existed before this catastrophe, even at a modest scale, survival would have required preparation. Shelters would need stable temperatures, independent energy sources, and protection from radiation and fire. Caves alone would not suffice. Purpose-built chambers, deep beneath rock and ice, would offer the best chance. This context gives new meaning to legends of subterranean cities lit without flame and powered by the earth itself. After the catastrophe, the surface world changes abruptly. Agriculture appears in multiple regions within a relatively short span. Monumental architecture emerges without clear developmental stages. Writing, metallurgy, and astronomy advance rapidly. This pattern has long puzzled historians. Gradual progress is expected, yet the archaeological record shows sudden leaps. One explanation is inheritance. Knowledge preserved through the disaster could have re-emerged once conditions stabilized. Ancient king lists support this view in symbolic form. Sumerian records describe rulers who reigned for impossibly long spans before the flood, followed by much shorter reigns after. Scholars treat these numbers as mythic exaggeration, yet the structure suggests a break in continuity. Something changes. Authority, knowledge, and longevity are diminished. The phrase that ends the pre-flood section is simple. Then the flood swept over. In Egypt, the god Thoth appears after a great disruption to restore order, geometry, and writing. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl emerges from the underworld to teach calendars and law. These figures are consistently associated with descent and return, with knowledge that originates below rather than above. They are not conquerors. They are restorers. Under the oceans, evidence hints at lost surface settlements. Sonar surveys off the coast of Cuba have revealed grid-like formations at depths that would have been dry land before sea levels rose at the end of the Ice Age. The structures are too regular to be volcanic. Dating suggests submergence around the same period as the global flood narratives. Access remains restricted, leaving interpretation suspended between geology and architecture. Some theorists suggest that the catastrophe triggered not only destruction, but activation. If deep systems existed to regulate magnetic fields, geothermal flow, or planetary balance, they may have been engaged during this crisis. The rhythmic pulses detected today could be remnants of that response, automated mechanisms continuing long after their original purpose faded from memory. Antarctica occupies a central place in this narrative. Geological evidence indicates that parts of the continent were warmer in the distant past. Ancient maps depict its coastline without ice. If a civilization sought the deepest refuge, the polar regions, aligned with the planet's axis and insulated by future ice, would offer unmatched concealment and stability. When ice advanced, entrances would seal naturally, preserving whatever lay beneath. Across traditions, the message is consistent. Humanity was not erased. It was interrupted. A cycle ended, and another began, separated by retreat rather than extinction. Those who descended became legends. Their machines became myths. Their archives became whispers in stone. The catastrophe was not only an ending, but a migration from surface to depth, from noise to silence. The earth closed over them, layer by layer, ice and sediment forming a lid that grew thicker with each passing century. Yet beneath that lid, systems may have continued to operate, lights may have continued to glow, and memory may have remained intact. What survived the younger Dryas may not have stood in ruins on the surface, but waited below, patient and unseen, until the world above was ready to begin again. As the surface world rebuilt itself after the Great Disruption, traces of something older continued to surface in unexpected ways, often misunderstood, often dismissed, yet stubbornly persistent. One of the clearest signs appears in the sudden emergence of complex knowledge systems that seem to arrive fully formed. Early civilizations display advanced understanding of astronomy, geometry, and engineering without a visible period of experimentation. Stone circles align precisely with solstices. Pyramids encode mathematical constants. Calendars track cycles longer than any single human lifetime. These are not the marks of gradual trial and error. They resemble inheritance. Ancient astronomers knew the precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble of Earth's axis that takes nearly 26,000 years to complete. This cycle is imperceptible within a single lifespan and requires long-term observation or preserved records. Yet it appears encoded in monuments and myths across the globe. In Egypt, the alignment of temples shifts subtly over dynasties, as if tracking this slow celestial drift. In Mesoamerica, calendar systems account for cycles far exceeding practical agricultural needs. Such precision suggests continuity of knowledge across deep time, preserved and transmitted rather than discovered anew. Writing itself emerges abruptly. In Mesopotamia, cuneiform appears not as crude markings, but as a structured system capable of recording law, trade, and astronomy. Egyptian hieroglyphs arrive with symbolic depth and grammatical consistency. These scripts do not show the awkward infancy expected of a newly invented technology. Instead, they appear refined, as if adapted from something older, perhaps simplified versions of a more complex system that once existed. Metallurgy follows the same pattern. Copper, bronze, and later iron are worked with techniques that require controlled temperatures and precise alloying. Early smiths seem to know which combinations produce strength, flexibility, or resonance. Legends credit divine or subterranean teachers for this knowledge. In Greek myth, metallurgy is a gift from beings who dwell beneath mountains. In Sumer, the god associated with craft and wisdom emerges from the deep waters below the earth. These stories frame technological knowledge as something revealed, not invented. Architecture offers further clues. Many ancient structures incorporate features that appear unnecessary for their stated purpose, but essential for something else. Deep chambers with no inscriptions, corridors aligned with magnetic north rather than cardinal directions. Stone blocks shaped with interlocking precision far exceeding structural need. Some archaeologists interpret these as ritual. Others suggest acoustic or energetic functions, especially as studies show that certain spaces amplify specific frequencies, causing sound to linger and resonate through stone. These resonant properties are not accidental. Experiments in ancient temples reveal that chanting at particular tones causes vibrations that travel through walls and floors, creating a physical sensation in the body. The same frequencies appear in modern recordings of subterranean anomalies. This suggests continuity between ancient design and deep Earth behavior, as if builders were working with principles that extended beyond the surface. Historical accounts occasionally hint at custodians of this knowledge. Medieval travelers to Central Asia wrote of wandering figures dressed in white who spoke of a hidden kingdom beneath the mountains, a place where history was recorded and watched over. They described these figures not as rulers, but as caretakers, preserving balance while remaining unseen. Such stories were often recorded without embellishment, noted as local belief rather than fantasy. In more recent times, explorers and researchers have encountered moments of abrupt silence around certain discoveries. Data vanishes. Sites are sealed. Access is restricted. This pattern repeats with surprising regularity. It is as if the modern world, consciously or not, mirrors ancient behavior, closing doors when something does not fit accepted narratives. The difference is that earlier cultures framed concealment as sacred duty, while modern institutions call it classification. Technology has begun to circle back toward ancient methods in unexpected ways. Engineers studying resonance-based energy systems explore the same principles hinted at in myths of sound-shaped stone and vibration-powered machines. Researchers investigating long-term data storage experiment with encoding information into crystal lattices and mineral structures, echoing the ancient idea of memory embedded in matter. What was once myth begins to resemble prototype. The Earth itself may act as a carrier of information. Seismic waves, magnetic fields, and resonant frequencies travel through the planet with consistency. Patterns recorded decades apart show similarities that suggest persistence rather than coincidence. If a system were designed to operate across millennia, embedding it into the planet's structure would be the most durable solution. Stone does not forget easily. Ancient myths often warn that this knowledge is dangerous if accessed prematurely. Stories of forbidden halls, sealed chambers, and guardians appear across cultures. These are not portrayed as punishments, but precautions. Knowledge preserved through catastrophe may be powerful enough to destabilize a recovering world. Restriction becomes protection, not control. This perspective reframes many historical mysteries. The sudden collapse of civilizations may not represent failure, but deliberate withdrawal. The absence of transitional forms in technology may indicate selective reintroduction. The persistence of underground legends may reflect real locations that were once accessible and later sealed. History, in this view, is not a straight line, but a layered record, with entire chapters hidden beneath the surface. As modern instruments grow more sensitive, they continue to detect faint signals beneath the noise, rhythms beneath randomness. These may be geological, they may be remnants of systems long abandoned, or they may be something else entirely, continuing to function as intended, indifferent to whether the surface world understands their purpose. The knowledge that survived the Great Disruption did not dominate the New World. It whispered. It appeared in fragments, symbols, alignments, and stories passed down as myth. It waited in stone and vibration rather than ink and paper. The civilizations that rose afterward built upon these fragments, unaware of their full origin, repeating forms whose original meaning had faded. If the Earth itself is an archive, then human history is written not only in ruins and texts, but in resonance, alignment, and silence. The deeper one looks, the clearer it becomes that the past did not disappear. It withdrew, leaving behind traces subtle enough to be ignored, yet consistent enough to endure. What survives beneath the surface may not be a civilization waiting to return, but a memory waiting to be recognized. In the modern age, the search for what lies beneath the Earth shifted from myth and speculation to instrumentation, yet the results remained no less unsettling. When governments and scientific institutions began probing the planet with unprecedented depth and precision, they expected to confirm existing models. Instead, they encountered contradictions that quietly accumulated in archives rather than textbooks. These contradictions did not scream discovery, they whispered persistence. One of the most ambitious efforts to reach deep into the planet was a project designed to drill through the Earth's crust and sample the mantle directly. Engineers chose locations where the crust was thinnest, believing this would shorten the journey. As drilling progressed, sensors transmitted streams of data that initially matched predictions. Then, without warning, anomalies appeared. Pressure readings dropped where they should have risen. Temperatures fluctuated instead of climbing steadily. Vibrations traveled back up the drill shaft with a regularity that felt measured rather than chaotic. Technicians described a sensation transmitted through the drill cables, a rhythmic pull that did not correspond to mechanical strain. It felt hollow, as though the drill had entered a region that responded rather than resisted. Shortly afterward, the project was halted. Official explanations cited budget overruns and technical difficulties. Internal logs, partially released decades later, noted unknown vibration and instrument failure at final depth. The borehole was sealed. A similar pattern unfolded in the Soviet Union's deepest drilling attempt. As the drill descended past 12 kilometers, rock samples revealed unexpected density changes. Sensors picked up continuous low-frequency resonance, steady and unbroken. Engineers joked nervously that the Earth was breathing. Recordings captured subsonic tones too low for human hearing, yet structured enough to be analyzed. When the drill ceased and could not be freed, the project ended abruptly. Years later, fragments of its archives surfaced, including maps showing corridors of unusually low density extending toward the magnetic pole. No follow-up expedition was recorded. Antarctica became a focal point for these anomalies. Radar mapping beneath kilometers of ice revealed geometric voids with sharp edges and uniform dimensions. These shapes did not resemble known glacial formations. When data streams from one survey abruptly cut out, the interruption was attributed to corruption. Field logs from the same mission were sealed under privacy regulations. A technician later recalled that the signal ended not gradually, but instantly, like a door closing. Satellite missions added another layer. Instruments designed to measure Earth's magnetic field detected pulsing signatures beneath the polar regions. These pulses repeated at precise intervals, matching patterns recorded decades earlier by seismologists in South America and Asia. The synchronization across time and distance suggested a stable source rather than transient noise. Public statements described natural fluctuations. They did not address the timing. Private expeditions attempted to bridge the gap between classified data and direct observation. One such expedition, composed of engineers, biologists, and former military specialists, established a temporary camp in a remote polar region to study geothermal anomalies. Communication ceased after several days. When a recovery team arrived, they found the camp intact. Equipment was still running. Food remained untouched. A single line of footprints led away from the site and ended abruptly, as if erased by heat rather than weather. Fragments of encrypted data recovered from their instruments repeated a single phrase: depth achieved, entry confirmed. Government interest did not end there. Advanced research programs quietly funded studies into deep subsurface resonance, officially framed as energy research. During the period of operation, environmental monitors detected unusual magnetic interference in nearby regions, pulsing at intervals identical to those recorded beneath Antarctica. When the program was discontinued, no explanation was offered. The interference faded shortly afterward. Academic researchers occasionally brushed against the same boundary. A geophysicist studying electromagnetic noise beneath the Pacific noticed structured signals embedded within the background field. The patterns were compressible, ordered, behaving more like information than randomness. His paper was rejected. In private correspondence, he noted that the signal was not coming from space, but from below. Similar experiences were reported by radio operators decades earlier, who recorded low-frequency bursts labeled as unknown terrestrial origin. When replayed at higher speed, the sounds formed harmonic sequences, structured by mathematical ratios, found in nature and ancient architecture alike. The repetition of these encounters suggests not a single discovery, but a persistent threshold. Instruments reach a certain depth, sensitivity, or alignment, and something responds. Not violently, not defensively, simply by continuing to operate. The response is never clear enough to confirm intention, yet never random enough to dismiss. Ancient texts describe a similar boundary. Tibetan writings speak of gates that open only when conditions are right, not forced by tools, but approached through alignment. Norse poetry describes a final sound rising from below the world tree, signaling the return of hidden forces. These are not invasion myths. They are timing myths, concerned with readiness rather than conquest. From a practical perspective, any civilization that retreated underground would prioritize concealment and stability. Entrances would be sealed, systems would be automated, interaction with the surface would be minimized, detection would occur only when specific conditions were met. In this light, modern encounters with deep anomalies may represent not discovery, but proximity. The Earth remains heavily regulated in its most remote regions. Airspace is controlled. Satellite imagery is filtered. Exploration is limited to approved corridors. These measures are justified in the language of environmental protection and international cooperation. Yet the effect is the same as ancient restrictions around sacred sites. Access is controlled. Knowledge is deferred. What modern science continues to encounter is not proof of an inner civilization, but resistance to closure. Each attempt to declare the question settled produces new data that reopens it. Each explanation leaves residues it cannot fully dissolve. The deeper the instruments reach, the more the planet behaves like a system with memory rather than a passive mass. If something persists beneath the crust, it does not announce itself. It hums, it pulses, it waits. The modern world listens with machines rather than myths. Yet here's something eerily familiar. A steady presence beneath the noise of civilization, unchanged by centuries of denial or curiosity. The pursuit of the inner world has not ended in revelation or refutation. It has ended in silence punctuated by rhythm, a pattern too consistent to ignore, too ambiguous to claim. Somewhere beneath ice, ocean, and stone, the descent may not be a journey backward into fantasy, but forward into a deeper understanding of what the earth has always been. Not just a place we live upon, but a structure we live inside. What survives longest is not stone or metal, but systems. Empires collapse when their structures depend on constant maintenance and visible control. What endures is what can function without oversight, without instruction, without recognition. Beneath the surface of the earth, every anomaly points toward this kind of endurance. Not ruins frozen in time, but processes that continue quietly and reliably, as if designed to outlast memory itself. Across the 20th century, engineers studying Earth's interior began to notice that certain deep regions behaved less like static geology and more like regulated environments. Temperature gradients stabilized where instability was expected. Pressure equalized across distances too large for natural diffusion. Energy appeared to move laterally through rock rather than dissipating outward. These behaviors suggest feedback systems, the hallmark of regulation rather than randomness. In nature, regulation exists, but it is messy. Rivers overflow. Volcanoes erupt, faults snap. What appears beneath the crust in these measurements is different. It is restrained, balanced. When pressure builds, it disperses smoothly. When magnetic stress increases, it diffuses along predictable paths. This is not how uncontrolled systems behave. It is how maintained systems behave. Ancient texts describe something similar using the language available to them. In India, the concept of dharma refers not only to law or morality, but to the sustaining order of the world. In Sumerian tradition, the mi are not commandments, but functional principles that keep civilization aligned with cosmic balance. These ideas are often treated as philosophy, yet they may reflect observations of a world that was actively stabilized from within. The idea of planetary maintenance feels modern, yet it appears repeatedly in old stories. Tibetan chronicles describe inner guardians whose task is not to rule the surface, but to prevent imbalance. They are said to intervene only when the world approaches collapse, then withdraw again. Norse myths speak of beings beneath the roots of existence who maintain the structure of reality itself, unseen but essential. These figures are not conquerors. They are custodians. Modern science recognizes similar principles in artificial systems. Satellites correct their own orbits. Nuclear reactors regulate their reactions. Autonomous probes operate for decades without human input. The more advanced the system, the less it requires constant oversight. If a civilization possessed advanced understanding of energy, resonance, and planetary physics, its greatest achievement would not be monuments, but infrastructure designed to run indefinitely. Deep beneath the Earth, energy is abundant. Geothermal heat flows continuously. Magnetic fields generate motion. Pressure differentials create potential. Harnessing these forces would not require fuel in the conventional sense, only control. Ancient descriptions of light without flame, machines that hum rather than burn, and systems that never stop align perfectly with this concept. They describe infrastructure powered by the planet itself. This reframes the idea of an underground empire. Rather than a city filled with streets and citizens, it may be a network. Corridors not for travel, but for energy flow. Chambers not for living, but for regulation. Archives not for reading, but for storage of information embedded into material and vibration. Presence without population. Function without visibility. When modern researchers detect rhythmic pulses beneath the crust, they may be sensing maintenance cycles, adjustments made at regular intervals to keep larger systems stable. The timing of these pulses often aligns with magnetic fluctuations, solar activity, or shifts in Earth's rotation. Rather than causing these changes, the systems below may be responding to them, compensating to prevent cascading failure. This interpretation explains why the pulses are calm rather than violent. They are not alarms. They are corrections. Small, precise, sufficient. The Earth does not shake apart. It adjusts. The system does not announce itself. It operates. Historical catastrophes may represent moments when this system was overwhelmed or forced into emergency mode. The Younger Dryas, with its abrupt climate reversal and cosmic signatures, fits this pattern. Ancient myths describe descent, sealing, and withdrawal during that time. The surface became unstable. The interior became refuge. Once equilibrium returned, the system reduced its outward influence, leaving only faint echoes detectable thousands of years later. This would also explain why access appears restricted, not by force, but by design. A maintenance system does not invite interference. It remains inaccessible not because it is hidden, but because it is not meant to be used. Modern drilling projects encounter resistance not as explosions or collapses, but as anomalies that halt progress without drama. Instruments fail. Data corrupts. Funding disappears. The system remains intact. Human civilization, in this view, exists atop a deeper layer of stewardship it no longer understands. Ancient cultures may have known of it, interacted with it briefly, then lost direct access as conditions changed. Over time, knowledge degraded into myth. Guardians became gods, systems became legends, function became story. What remains today are symptoms, magnetic anomalies, resonant hums, geometric voids, structured silence. Each one alone can be explained away. Together, they form a coherent picture of a planet that is not merely geological, but engineered at a scale that defies modern categories. The most unsettling aspect of this possibility is not that such systems exist, but that they do not require us. They do not react to belief or disbelief. They do not respond to attention. They persist whether noticed or not. This indifference is the mark of true longevity. If the greatest empire humanity ever built retreated beneath the earth, its true legacy would not be survivors waiting to return. It would be stability, a planet that remains habitable despite repeated catastrophes, a magnetic field that recovers, a climate that resets, a world that continues. The surface tells stories of collapse and rebirth. Beneath it, something quieter may be at work, ensuring that collapse is never final. The hum beneath our feet may not be a message or a warning. It may simply be the sound of the world being kept in balance by systems older than history, operating exactly as intended. Over time, silence itself becomes evidence. When a subject repeatedly surfaces across centuries, cultures, and technologies, yet never settles into certainty, it leaves behind a distinct trace. Not proof, but pressure. the idea of an inner world, of systems beneath the crust that persist beyond surface history, exerts that kind of pressure. It bends explanations, strains categories, and resists dismissal. The deeper modern science looks, the more the Earth appears layered not only in rock, but in intention. One of the most revealing patterns is absence. Entire regions of the planet remain curiously untouched by full exploration. Antarctica, protected by international treaties, is closed under the language of preservation. Deep ocean trenches are mapped but rarely visited. Certain deserts and mountain ranges are designated restricted zones, often for reasons that shift over time. Environmental protection, military necessity, scientific caution. The justifications differ, but the result is the same. The deepest places remain unseen. This mirrors ancient behavior. Sacred sites were often declared forbidden, not because they were dangerous, but because they were not meant for constant access. The idea of threshold appears repeatedly in myth. Gates that open only at certain times, chambers that respond only to specific conditions, knowledge that reveals itself only when approached indirectly. Modern restrictions may echo this pattern unconsciously, reinforcing barriers that once had ritual meaning. Technological attempts to bypass these thresholds rarely succeed cleanly. Deep drilling projects encounter anomalies that halt progress without catastrophic failure. Instruments malfunction in ways that leave no clear cause. Data degrades precisely at moments of interest. Funding evaporates. Projects are reclassified or quietly abandoned. None of this proves resistance, yet the consistency of interruption is striking. The planet allows observation, but not intrusion. This aligns with the concept of a self-regulating system. Any system designed to endure would prioritize integrity over accessibility. It would permit passive measurement while discouraging interference. In engineering, this principle appears in systems that isolate critical components behind layers of redundancy and insulation. The more essential the function, the less exposed it becomes. If the Earth hosts such systems, concealment would not be defensive, it would be practical. Ancient stories reflect this logic. The builders beneath the mountains are never described as hostile. They are distant, neutral, concerned with balance rather than dominance. When they appear, it is briefly, usually to restore order after catastrophe. Then they withdraw again. Their power lies not in force, but in continuity. They do not compete with surface civilizations. They outlast them. Modern humanity, accustomed to control and extraction, struggles to interpret this indifference. We expect hidden power to seek influence. We assume knowledge wants to be used. Yet the systems hinted at beneath the Earth appear content to remain unnoticed, functioning without acknowledgement. This challenges deeply held assumptions about progress and purpose. Scientific models increasingly describe Earth as a complex, dynamic system rather than a static object. Feedback loops govern climate, magnetism, and tectonics. Small adjustments prevent larger failures. In this framework, anomalies beneath the crust may not be errors, but mechanisms. The hum, the pulses, the resonance may represent ongoing calibration, subtle corrections that maintain long-term stability. If this is true, then humanity's role is secondary. The planet does not revolve around civilization. Civilization exists within planetary limits, maintained by deeper forces. Ancient cultures may have recognized this intuitively, framing their myths around humility and restraint. Modern culture, focused on mastery, resists the implication. The persistence of underground legends may reflect a collective memory of dependency. A sense that survival has, at times, relied on forces beyond surface control. When catastrophes strike, humanity does not always solve them. Sometimes it endures them because conditions allow endurance. Those conditions may be engineered, or they may be natural systems refined over unimaginable time. What matters is that the Earth continues. Magnetic fields recover after collapse. Life returns after extinction. Climate stabilizes after chaos. These patterns are often attributed to chance or resilience, yet resilience itself can be a property of design. Not intentional design in a human sense, but structured adaptability built into the planet's processes. The idea that a forgotten civilization contributed to this structure remains speculative, yet it fits the data more comfortably than dismissal. Ancient engineers, facing planetary crisis, may have prioritized survival of the system over survival of themselves. They may have embedded their knowledge into the Earth, not to rule future generations, but to ensure the world remained habitable. In this scenario, the inner world is not a refuge waiting to be rediscovered. It is a legacy already fulfilled. Its purpose is not to return, but to persist. The surface world inherits stability without understanding its source. Myths preserve fragments of memory, enough to inspire wonder, not enough to grant access. As instruments grow more sensitive, humanity may continue to brush against these deeper layers. We will record pulses, map voids, and note anomalies. We will argue over explanations and move on. The systems below will continue to operate, unaffected by belief or denial. Silence in this context is not emptiness. It is restraint. The Earth does not reveal everything because it does not need to. Whatever was built beneath it was designed to function without attention, to correct without announcement, to endure without recognition. The greatest legacy of any civilization is not its monuments, but the conditions it leaves behind. If something beneath the Earth has preserved those conditions through cycles of destruction and rebirth, then its success is measured not by visibility, but by absence. We live on a stable world and call it natural. Perhaps that is the final concealment, not hiding the system, but making it seem inevitable. The hum beneath our feet fades into background noise. The pulses blend into data. The architecture of survival becomes indistinguishable from geology itself. And so the inner world remains what it has always been, not lost, not hidden, simply doing its work far below the surface, while history unfolds above it, unaware. There is a point where accumulation becomes pattern. When fragments from myth, measurement, and memory align often enough, they stop behaving like coincidence and begin to resemble inheritance. By the late 20th century, this pattern had grown too dense to ignore, even as it remained officially unacknowledged. The Earth was no longer merely responding to force. It was responding to timing. Global sensor networks, once designed only to detect catastrophe, began revealing subtler behaviors. Long-duration tremors, lasting minutes or even hours, rippled through the planet without causing damage. These vibrations were smooth, harmonic, and slow, unlike the sharp spikes of earthquakes. They were dubbed earth hums, a term that sounded benign enough to avoid deeper scrutiny. Yet their persistence raised quiet concern. A planet does not hum without reason. When researchers compared recordings from different decades, a troubling detail emerged. The hum was changing. Not randomly, but incrementally. Frequencies shifted upward. Amplitudes increased slightly, then stabilized. The changes were small, but measurable. Over time, they formed a trajectory rather than noise. This behavior mirrors engineered systems adjusting output in response to changing conditions, not natural systems drifting aimlessly. At the same time, Earth's magnetic field began exhibiting asymmetries that defied conventional explanation. The poles wandered faster than expected. Regions of weakness expanded unevenly. These changes did not correspond neatly with models of molten core dynamics. Instead, they appeared to follow corridors and arcs, as if constrained by invisible boundaries beneath the crust. Satellite data showed these distortions clustering around known deep anomalies, places where resonance, heat, and density behaved unusually. This convergence of vibration and magnetism suggests coordination. In physics, coordination across systems requires coupling, a mechanism that allows one process to influence another. The deeper layers of the Earth may act as such a coupling medium, linking mechanical vibration, electromagnetic flow, and thermal regulation into a unified response. If this coupling is artificial or enhanced by ancient intervention, its effects would appear exactly as observed, subtle, persistent, and difficult to isolate. Ancient cosmologies describe something remarkably similar. The world is often portrayed as layered, with movement and change flowing upward from deeper realms. In Hindu tradition, the churn of the cosmic ocean begins below and affects all that follows. In Chinese philosophy, the balance of yin and yang arises from unseen interaction beneath the surface of things. These are not technical descriptions, yet they reflect an intuition that causality does not originate where it is most visible. Modern attempts to model Earth as a closed system struggle with edge cases. Climate feedback loops behave unpredictably. Magnetic reversals do not follow clean schedules. Seismic behavior reveals zones of control rather than randomness. Each of these challenges invites new variables, often reluctantly added. What is rarely considered is that the variable may not be natural at all, but structural. If the planet contains deep systems designed to modulate energy and stress, they would operate slowly, correcting over decades rather than moments. Their presence would be inferred only through long-term trends. This matches what is observed. The Earth does not react explosively to imbalance. It adapts, it absorbs, it redistributes. These are the behaviors of a managed system. Human civilization has unknowingly mirrored this approach in its most resilient technologies. Power grids stabilize load, data networks reroute traffic, autonomous systems correct drift. In each case, the goal is continuity, not visibility. The best systems disappear into normalcy. They are noticed only when they fail. If the Earth hosts such systems, their greatest success would be invisibility. The persistence of ancient warnings about misuse gains new relevance in this context. Stories of sealed chambers, forbidden descent, and guarded knowledge may not be moral allegory. They may be safety protocol. Interfering with systems that regulate planetary balance would be catastrophic. Restriction would be necessary, not authoritarian. Silence would be protection. Modern encounters with resistance, stalled projects, and classified data may reflect this principle unconsciously. Humanity pushes downward, encounters instability, and retreats. Not because something attacks, but because conditions become untenable. Instruments fail. progress slows, attention shifts elsewhere. The deeper layer remains intact. Over time, this creates the illusion that nothing is there. The absence of proof becomes proof of absence. Yet the data continues to accumulate quietly. Each pulse, each hum, each anomaly adds to a record that grows harder to ignore. The planet behaves as though it is being watched over, not by consciousness in the human sense, but by systems executing long-established parameters. If a civilization once existed that understood planetary mechanics deeply enough to intervene, its greatest act may have been restraint. Rather than reshaping the surface indefinitely, it may have chosen to embed stability beneath it. When catastrophe came, it withdrew not to rule, but to preserve. When conditions improved, it did not return openly, allowing humanity to rebuild independently. This interpretation reframes the idea of legacy. Legacy is not survival of a people, but survival of a function. Whatever descended beneath the earth may no longer exist as a culture, yet its work continues. The hum persists, the field stabilizes, the planet remains habitable. The surface world experiences history as cycles of rise and fall, progress and collapse. Beneath it, something steadier may be operating, smoothing extremes and absorbing shocks. The deeper layer does not care about names, borders, or belief. It responds only to imbalance. As humanity enters an era of unprecedented planetary stress, these questions become less academic. Climate shifts, magnetic instability, and geological uncertainty converge. Instruments register increasing activity beneath the surface. Not chaos, but adjustment. Not warning, but preparation. The Earth may be doing what it has always done when pressure builds. It hums, it corrects, it continues. Whether this behavior is purely natural or guided by structures laid down long ago, the effect is the same. The planet endures. The true mystery is not whether something exists beneath the crust. The mystery is how long it has been there, quietly ensuring that the story above it can continue at all. As the present era advances deeper into technological dependence, the relationship between humanity and the Earth reveals an unexpected reversal. Instead of mastering the planet, modern civilization increasingly discovers its reliance on systems it did not build and cannot fully control. Power grids fail, climate models falter, and predictive frameworks strain under variables that refuse simplification. Beneath these failures lies a quieter realization. Stability is not created at the surface. It emerges from deeper layers, governed by processes older than any nation or ideology. Geophysicists studying long-term planetary behavior have begun to acknowledge that Earth exhibits corrective tendencies. When stress accumulates, it does not always release catastrophically. Instead, it redistributes. Energy migrates through deep channels, pressure equalizes across vast regions, and imbalance is absorbed rather than amplified. These behaviors resemble engineered damping systems used in modern architecture to prevent structural collapse during earthquakes. The difference is scale. The Earth applies this principle to itself. Ancient cultures framed this phenomenon as guardianship. They spoke of keepers beneath the mountains, not as rulers but as stabilizers. Their task was not to command events, but to prevent extremes. In Tibetan accounts, these figures intervene only when imbalance threatens the continuity of life, then withdraw once equilibrium is restored. This pattern appears across mythologies, suggesting a shared understanding that interference should be minimal and temporary. Modern science approaches the same idea through systems theory. Complex systems remain viable when feedback loops operate efficiently and intervention is restrained. Overcorrection leads to collapse. Undercorrection leads to runaway failure. Balance exists in the space between. When planetary data is examined through this lens, anomalies beneath the crust begin to resemble regulatory infrastructure rather than geological accidents. Seismic imaging reveals vast zones where waves slow and bend predictably, as if guided along boundaries. These zones do not align with simple models of mantle composition. They form arcs and corridors that suggest organization. Thermal mapping shows similar behavior. Heat does not rise uniformly. It flows laterally, spreading beneath continents in controlled patterns that moderate surface conditions. These mechanisms act quietly, continuously, and without visible markers. If ancient engineers understood these principles, their greatest contribution would not have been monuments or machines, but constraint. They would have shaped the Earth's deeper layers to absorb stress, stabilize magnetic fields, and regulate energy flow. Once established, such systems would require no supervision. They would simply operate, adapting to planetary conditions long after their creators withdrew. This interpretation clarifies why access appears impossible. The systems were never intended for interaction. They were designed to be left alone. Modern drilling and exploration encounter resistance not as barriers, but as incompatibility. Tools fail because they disrupt equilibrium. Data degrades because intrusion exceeds tolerance. Progress halts because the system favors stability over access. Culturally, humanity struggles with this idea. We equate knowledge with visibility and power with control. Ancient traditions suggest the opposite. True mastery lies in knowing when to withdraw. Knowledge preserved too openly invites misuse. Systems exposed too widely invite corruption. What survives longest is what remains unnoticed. The transition from ancient understanding to modern ignorance may not have been sudden. As surface civilizations rose and fell, interaction with deeper systems likely diminished gradually. Ritual replaced practice, symbol replaced function. Eventually, memory degraded into myth. What remained were stories of hidden worlds, sealed gates, and forbidden depths, stripped of their technical meaning but retaining their cautionary tone. In recent centuries, science began retracing these paths unintentionally. Resonance, once ritual, became physics. Vibration, once sacred, became data. Energy drawn from gradients rather than fuel echoes ancient descriptions of fireless light and humming machines. The difference lies not in principle, but in intention. Modern systems seek extraction. Ancient systems sought balance. As environmental pressures mount, this distinction grows critical. Climate instability, magnetic drift, and ecological collapse challenge surface-based solutions. No amount of policy or technology can override planetary processes. At best, humanity can align with them. Ancient cultures may have recognized this limitation, embedding their solutions deeper, beyond the reach of political cycles and cultural decay. The notion that the Earth itself contains legacy systems reframes responsibility. Preservation becomes collective, not individual. Stability becomes inherited, not earned. Humanity benefits from conditions it did not create and cannot easily replicate. This realization carries humility rather than fear. The inner world, if understood as process rather than place, dissolves the need for discovery. There is nothing to conquer, nothing to reveal dramatically. The systems beneath the Earth succeed precisely because they remain hidden. They do not announce themselves. They correct quietly. They endure. Every civilization leaves traces. Most are ruins. Some are myths. A rare few may be functions embedded so deeply they are mistaken for nature itself. If an ancient civilization achieved such embedding, its disappearance would not be failure. It would be the final step of success. The Earth today continues to regulate itself within tolerable limits. Catastrophes occur, but life persists. Magnetic fields fluctuate, but recover. Climate shifts, but stabilizes. These outcomes are often attributed to chance resilience. Yet resilience can be cultivated. It can be designed. Whether through natural evolution or ancient intervention, the result is the same. The planet behaves like a system that wants to continue, not indefinitely unchanged, but adaptively stable. The deeper layers absorb what the surface cannot. Human history unfolds atop this foundation, unaware of its support. Empires rise convinced of permanence. They fall surprised by fragility. Beneath them, the Earth continues its quieter work, unchanged by ambition or collapse. If there is a lesson preserved in the depths, it is not instruction, but example. Stability is achieved through restraint, endurance through silence, influence through withdrawal. The inner world doesn't seek recognition, it seeks balance. And so it remains, beneath stone and ice, not waiting, not watching, but operating. The planet holds itself together. Humanity lives within that margin, unaware that the greatest structure sustaining it was never meant to be seen. As the long arc of evidence stretches toward the present, a final tension emerges between discovery and restraint. Humanity now possesses tools capable of reaching deeper than any previous age. Yet the closer those tools approach the planet's hidden thresholds, the more progress seems to dissolve into hesitation. This hesitation is not imposed by fear alone, but by an unspoken recognition that some systems are not meant to be confronted head-on. They are meant to be lived with. Throughout modern history, every serious attempt to penetrate the deepest layers of the Earth has ended the same way. Not in disaster, not in revelation, but in quiet termination. Projects conclude early. Data is labeled inconclusive. Attention moves elsewhere. The pattern does not resemble suppression in the dramatic sense. It resembles fatigue, as if the pursuit itself loses momentum once it crosses an invisible boundary. This boundary mirrors one described repeatedly in ancient traditions. The deepest realms are not forbidden because they are dangerous, but because they are complete. Entering them would not add value. It would only introduce instability. The act of descent in these stories is purposeful only during crisis. Once balance is restored, descent becomes unnecessary, even irresponsible. Modern science, for all its precision, is beginning to approach this same conclusion through a different path. Systems theory emphasizes minimal intervention. Ecology warns of cascading consequences when foundational processes are disrupted. Climate science shows how delicate balances can tip irreversibly when stressed. In each field, the lesson is the same. Stability is preserved through alignment, not domination. If the Earth contains deep regulatory systems, then interfering with them would be the ultimate ecological error. These systems would not resist actively. They would simply cease to compensate. The result would not be immediate catastrophe, but gradual loss of resilience, Extremes would grow harsher, recovery would slow, the planet would become less forgiving. This perspective casts ancient myths in a new light. Stories of sealed gates and guardians are not threats. They are warnings. Do not disturb what keeps the world intact. Do not confuse access with entitlement. Knowledge preserved beneath the earth was never meant to empower individuals or civilizations. It was meant to safeguard continuity itself. Human ambition has always been drawn toward what lies hidden. Mountains are climbed because they stand. Oceans are crossed because they separate. The depths of the earth invite the same impulse. Yet the difference lies in consequence. A mountain can be climbed without altering its role. A deep planetary system cannot be disrupted without affecting everything above it. This may explain why, across cultures, the inner world is described as indifferent rather than hostile. It does not judge. It does not negotiate. It simply exists within parameters set long ago. Those parameters are not moral. They are functional. Stay within them, and the world persists. Exceed them, and correction follows. Modern humanity stands at a moment of convergence. Technological capacity grows rapidly, while planetary tolerance narrows. Environmental stress tests systems that once absorbed imbalance easily. The hum beneath the earth grows slightly more pronounced. Magnetic irregularities expand. Seismic patterns shift. None of these changes indicate imminent collapse. They indicate adjustment. Ancient texts describe such periods as times of weighing, not judgment, but recalibration. The world does not end. It rebalances. Those who align endure. Those who resist are forced to adapt or vanish. This cycle repeats not because the planet is cruel, but because it is finite. The idea that something beneath the earth has guided this process for millennia is not comforting or frightening. It is humbling. It suggests that humanity has never been alone in maintaining the conditions for its survival, yet has also never been central to that maintenance. We are beneficiaries, not architects. If the ancient builders ever existed, their final act was not to rule the future, but to remove themselves from it. They did not leave commandments or kings. They left function. Their legacy is not memory, but margin, the margin within which life can continue. In this sense, the greatest mistake would be to seek proof through intrusion. Proof would destroy what it seeks to confirm. The deepest truths of the planet are not accessible through force or exposure. They are revealed through consequence and continuity. The earth does not advertise its inner workings. It demonstrates them. A world that remains habitable through repeated catastrophe is not accidental. A magnetic field that recovers is not guaranteed. A climate that stabilizes after extremes is not assured. These outcomes suggest care, whether natural or shaped. The surface world will continue to debate origins, assign names, and construct narratives. Beneath those narratives, the planet continues its quieter labor. Energy circulates. Stress diffuses. Balance holds, not perfectly, but sufficiently. Perhaps the final realization is this. The inner world, if it exists, is not something to be found at the end of exploration. It is something already at work beneath every step we take. Its success is measured not in discovery, but in survival. As humanity looks outward to stars and inward to cores, the greatest challenge may not be technological, but philosophical. To accept that some of the most important systems sustaining us were never meant to be understood fully, only respected. The hum beneath the earth continues. It doesn't grow louder to demand attention. It does not fade to invite neglect. It remains steady, constant, and sufficient. And within that steadiness, life persists on the surface, generation after generation, unaware that the deepest inheritance it received was not knowledge, power, or dominion, but balance quietly maintained far below, exactly as intended. In the end, what remains is not revelation, but continuity. After layers of myth, measurement, speculation, and silence are set aside, the earth itself stands as the only enduring witness. Civilizations rise convinced they are the first to understand the world. They fall believing they are the last. Between these moments, the planet persists, carrying traces of every cycle without displaying allegiance to any of them. The idea of a hidden inner world does not demand belief in secret cities or unseen populations. Its deeper implication is more subtle and more challenging. It suggests that the most important structures shaping human survival are not visible, not dramatic, and not responsive to attention. They function beneath awareness, independent of recognition. Whether shaped by ancient intelligence or by the deep logic of planetary physics, the result is the same. Stability emerges from depth. Throughout history, humanity has mistaken visibility for importance. Towers, monuments, empires, and technologies dominate memory because they are seen. What lies beneath is forgotten precisely because it works. Foundations are ignored until they fail. Balance is assumed until it disappears. The inner systems of the earth have never failed in a way that ends the story entirely. That alone distinguishes them from every surface achievement. Ancient cultures may have sensed this truth instinctively. Their myths do not celebrate conquest of the depths. They warn against it. They frame descent as rare, conditional, and temporary. Return is emphasized more than discovery. Knowledge gained below is not used to dominate, but to restore balance above. Once restoration is complete, withdrawal follows. Silence resumes. Modern humanity approaches the same boundary without ritual or myth, guided instead by instruments and equations. Yet the result is strikingly similar. Progress slows, access narrows, curiosity gives way to caution, not because of fear imposed from outside, but because the systems encountered do not respond to force in meaningful ways. They are indifferent to ambition. The Earth has endured asteroid impacts, magnetic collapses, ice ages, and mass extinctions. Each time it reorganizes. Life returns in altered form, but return it does. This capacity for recovery suggests embedded resilience. Whether that resilience is purely natural or enhanced by ancient intervention may never be definitively resolved. The distinction may not matter. What matters is that resilience exists. If an ancient civilization contributed to this resilience, its success lies in anonymity. Its work is indistinguishable from nature. Its intelligence is embedded so deeply that it no longer appears as intelligence at all. This is the highest form of durability, to become invisible to history while shaping it completely. The surface world continues to debate progress, collapse, and destiny. Beneath it, the planet maintains conditions within tolerable bounds. This maintenance does not prevent suffering or destruction. It prevents finality. Nothing ends absolutely. There is always another cycle, another recovery, another attempt. In this light, the hum beneath the earth is not a message. It is not a warning. It is not an invitation. It is simply evidence of motion where stillness was assumed, of order where chaos was expected, of endurance where fragility dominates human experience. The true legacy of the inner world, if such a concept is useful at all, is restraint. The restraint to act only when necessary, to intervene only to preserve continuity, to withdraw once balance is restored. This philosophy runs counter to most human instincts, yet aligns perfectly with survival at planetary scale. As humanity faces an uncertain future shaped by its own actions, the deeper lesson may already be present beneath its feet. Stability is not achieved through dominance, speed, or accumulation. It is achieved through alignment, patience, and respect for systems larger than any single generation. The Earth does not need humanity to understand it in order to function. It never has. Humanity, however, depends entirely on the Earth continuing to function as it always has. This asymmetry defines the relationship more accurately than any myth or model. If the idea of an inner world endures, it will not endure as proof uncovered or secrets exposed. It will endure as perspective. A reminder that what matters most often lies beyond reach, not because it is hidden, but because it was never meant to be grasped. The story ends not with discovery, but with recognition. Recognition that beneath every step, beneath every civilization, beneath every attempt to explain existence, there is a deeper order quietly sustaining the possibility of all stories yet to come. The Earth continues. That is the final evidence. Everything else is interpretation.